Be the envy of the neighborhood. 860 KKAT, where the grass is always greener. Welcome to Gardening Utah. Here's composter and show hoster, Jana Francis.
Welcome to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. Every week here on Gardening Utah, we give you gardening inspiration and advice from experts across the state. We talk about all things vegetables, flowers, trees, shrubs, annuals, perennials, and of course, your lawn. Thank you so much for listening. We really hope that this show is something that you look forward to checking in with and listening to every week. Episodes drop every weekend on Apple Podcasts, and we air on the radio in Utah on Saturday and Sunday at 10 a.m. on KKAT 860 AM. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, make sure to subscribe because then you'll get a notification every time new episodes drop. I hope that this is a fun and informative show that you can listen to when you're, trying to get your garden inspiration on, when you're out about shopping nurseries or garden centers. Just plug in those headphones and catch up to Gardening Utah. And if you haven't listened to any of our past episodes, because I know we have a lot of new listeners to the show, you definitely should go back and give it a listen. I've been so lucky to have had some incredible guests of Gardening Utah, and the community, the gardening community, and the experts across the state have been so great to come on the show and share their knowledge with all of us. And it's just been really fun. It's been so much fun for me to get to know some of these incredible people that, reside in the state of Utah that love to share their knowledge of everything from lawn care to, ornamentals. I mean, the list goes on and on of all the topics that we've had on the show. And speaking of topics, I would love to know what you would like to see or hear, technically, on Gardening Utah. So the best way to reach me is through Instagram. Our handle is @GardeningUtah. Send me a DM. Let me know what you want to see. I'd love to talk to listeners. And if you ever have questions and those kinds of things, you never know. Maybe I can bring in an expert and get your questions answered. Okay, so today's show, we are going to be talking about quite a few fun things with Cameron Allcott from Progressive Plants. With Cameron, we cover quite a few topics today. We're going to be talking a lot about the availability of certain plants at a certain time of year. I know he's getting a lot of requests for certain plants that you just can't get this time of year. And so he's going to give us a little bit of tips and tricks on what you should be looking for at certain times of the year, and when you see them that you should snatch them up. We're also going to dispel some myths about, can you plant this time of year? I mean, my goodness, it's in the hundreds right now. And, a lot of people think, it's too late to plant or it's too hot to plant. So Cameron is going to get into that with us. And we're also going to talk about branded plants. When you're going through the garden centers and you're seeing certain pots that have an actual name on them, whether it's Proven Winners or Bonnie plants. We're going to talk about whether or not those are different and how from any other bedding plants or perennials that you can buy. So we're going to get into all of that in just a minute. But first, the tip of the week.
860 KKAT with your Gardening Utah tip of the week.
My tip of the week is prevent powdery mildew now. Now, what's powdery mildew? Well, maybe you're looking out at your squash plants and they're starting to turn white and maybe a little bit wilted. That is cucurbit powdery mildew, and it is very common in Utah. It will show up on your vine crops, especially where plants are crowded or running together. I get it in my zinnias and sometimes cucumbers, but it's a foliar disease, and as the infection continues, the leaves turn yellow and then they become distorted. Now, the best way to manage powdery mildew in the future is prevention. Once it's occurred, there's really no way to cure the plant. You can just try to knock the infection back a little bit. And the initial infection occurs via airborne spores from neighboring plants. And it can develop very quickly once the infection occurs. And it's usually first visible on the shaded undergrowth where the leaves are dense, the light is low, and the humidity is moderate. So these infected leaves, they'll turn yellow, they'll wither, and they'll die. Now, the fruit of the plant is usually not directly affected, but the yield of the overall plant and the flavor can be reduced. Now, this disease really does thrive in humid and shady environments under moderate temperatures, usually under 80 degrees. So monitor your plants throughout the summer for infection. And if you notice any spotting or curling of the foliage or like the circular white patch on the leaves, remove those leaves immediately. It just depends on how much it is. You don't want to obviously take off all the leaves of a plant. But at the first sign of infection, you really want to remove that leaf. And at that time, you can start applying preventative fungicide sprays about every 2 weeks. Now, some people have a lot of different things that they like to try. And one of them is milk. And believe it or not, in a 2009 study by the University of Connecticut, they tested a milk treatment of 40% milk and 60% water on plants infected with powdery mildew. And what they said was, I quote, "The milk treatment provided significantly less disease than the untreated control, and the chemical treatment had equal or significantly less disease than the milk." So scientists aren't sure why milk can be so effective, but they believe that when the milk interacts with the sun, it produces free radicals that are toxic to the fungus. Now, I personally have never tried it, so I can't personally vouch for it, but I do get powdery mildew. I usually typically try to remove the leaves at the first sign because I'm always out there looking for squash bugs too. So some other things that you can try to, as a fungicide spray about every 2 weeks to try to prevent powdery mildew once you do see it, there's potassium bicarbonate, there's the milk that I just talked about. Neem oil is probably the most common that you'll find that people really say that they have good success with neem oil. There's mixtures on the internet you can look up that include vinegar and baking soda and garlic and sulfur, but really you got to be really careful with baking soda and vinegar because it can burn the plant. So just make sure that whatever it is you decide to try, that you find the right mixture of that just by looking it up online. So here's other ways that you can prevent powdery mildew from being a massive problem. Number one, don't crowd your plants when you plant them. 2, try not to grow plants susceptible to it in the shade. For example, squash plants are very, very susceptible to it. And dispose of infected leaves and stems as soon as you see an early sign of the infection. And water the soil, not the plant. Many times when I'm seeing powdery mildew infections places, it's really because there's maybe overhead watering or sprays. And that's how the plants are getting watered, and that really can spread powdery mildew. And then buying mildew-resistant varieties. There really are, next spring when you are going to buy your squash, if you do have a big problem with powdery mildew, there are some pumpkin and melon varieties that are at least partially resistant. So you can just kind of have a look at the tag, and if it says, resistant to powdery mildew, that would be a good one for you. For the summer squashes, off the top of my head, I know that there is a variety called Sun Gold that some people have some good success with. Also, in the fall, be very, very careful to throw away your plant debris instead of leaving it in the soil, because the fungus can overwinter in the soil on any plant debris that's left. So really get that up in the fall and destroy all the infected plant material, throw it away. And then next spring as well, start your plantings in really good, healthy, rich soil, and then space them out further apart. And again, make sure that you're watering the plant, not the leaves. And that was the tip of the week.
Never miss a tip for your garden and never miss an episode. The Gardening Utah Podcast with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden. Here's Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis. And today, in our virtual studio, we're talking with Cameron Allcott from Progressive Plants. What is up, Cameron?
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. So we're recording this over Zoom right now, and it looks like you're in a hotel room. So tell us where in the world you are right now.
Well, this is a game that we play. Where in the world is Cameron Allcott? No, It doesn't have the same ring to it. No, I'm actually in Sun Valley. I'm actually just outside of Sun Valley, in a little town called Haley. I'm just up here visiting some clients up here because we sell to a lot of the other nurseries, and we do a lot with resort towns. So Sun Valley Garden Center is going to be one of my stops today. It's a cute little place up here in Sun Valley, just outside of Sun Valley, and they're just absolutely just darling people. Oh. So yeah, I get to go hang out in the mountains today. It's wonderful.
Oh, it sounds heavenly, especially with all of the heat going on right now down here. My word.
I think it's supposed to be like 80, 85. Just that's it.
Oh, my word. I think it's going to hit 100 here. So this will be an interesting day.
Yeah, I think I'm going to stay here
Yeah,
for the weekend, maybe.
think you should for sure. So
Me
we do
too.
have it was interesting. I was looking at our podcast numbers the other day for the listenership to just get an idea of like who's listening to Gardening Utah. And we have so many people in Idaho.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking, I saw Boise, Idaho Falls, Ashton. Yeah. So shout out to all of our listeners in Idaho.
That's awesome.
I know. It's pretty cool. Actually, we had people from Australia. I mean, I was blown away. People from all over the place. And
That's amazing.
I know. And it's like Utah, and then it's California, and then it's Wyoming, and then it's Idaho.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really cool because I think it kind of shows that how universal gardening is. Like, even though we're all in different areas of the world, we all get very interested in what other people are doing in their climates, even though it may not have any application to our current problem. I mean, like we've all watched like, Love Your Garden and like Monty Don, even like Laura from Garden Answer. I mean, she's kind of close to like what our climate's like in Salt Lake, but it has nothing to do with like, Florida.
Right.
But,
right.
People watch her from Florida, she's like famous, but I think it just kind of goes to show like, how we all want to be connected with gardening and, like the earth and flowers. We just want to appreciate beauty. We want to feel like we accomplished something. So I think it's just really cool that we get, listenership and viewership and participation from all over the world.
Yeah, it's very cool. And one thing that I tell the Utah listeners, it's been, I think it was one of my tips of the week a few episodes back, but I talked about how when you're in Utah specifically, you really need to go local for your gardening advice because there's so many unique soil and watering considerations for the state of Utah. So I just kind of warned, like, if you're watching gardening advice on YouTube, especially as it relates to like lawn care, you really need to go local for your advice.
I completely 100% agree. I run into situations sometimes where people will ask me questions and then I'll tell them, and then they'll go to YouTube and look for verification of that. I'm like, why would you go to the internet from a complete stranger who doesn't know anything about your climate and take their word over mine? I've always kind of wondered about that.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? I saw one the other day about adding peat moss to the soil is great for the lawn, and I'm thinking, not in Utah, please no.
No.
That will turn into cement. Or actually, it's sand that makes it turn into cement. But either way, they were suggesting adding, sand and peat moss to your lawn before you put it down, and that would be a bad situation if you were here.
Yeah, you don't really need that here. It's going to be very, regional specific. So
totally. Okay, so you're up there visiting clients in Idaho, and we were talking a little bit earlier about, before we started the show, about the availability of certain plants at the times of year. And I've noticed, especially like on some of the garden groups locally lately, that people have been saying, well, when I've tried to buy this, but now it's gone, I can't get the following plants. And you're like an expert at availability, so talk about that to me.
Well, remember when we were kids, this is going to probably date us, but how you could only get like certain vegetables at certain times of the year, or certain fruits at certain times of the year. It's, a lot of it's due to, being able to grow oranges in Florida or whatever and have them only around for like, February or something like that.
Yeah.
Nowadays we have a lot better technology, growing habits, and magical things called greenhouses, to develop a lot of these, and improved, travel routes and refrigeration and stuff like that to move produce back and forth, so that you can now get, like dragon fruit in the Northwest Territories in Canada. Like that's a possibility now where it wasn't 30, 40 years ago. Ornamental plants, however, we don't do the same things with them. We don't grow them in all different climates, and ship them to all parts of the country, just because the cost of them get like really expensive if you do it that way. But like the nursery business is very regional. So typically you're not going to get stuff that's grown in New York shipped over to Utah. That just doesn't really happen. And the things that grow in New York or things that grow in Utah don't necessarily grow in each other's climates. So, me trying to get a cactus out of Arizona and grow it in New Hampshire, not going to happen.
Yeah.
So you have some regional availability issues there, just because it's like, we are subject to like what we can grow in our climate. So like a lot of times I see, like in the very beginning of the year, people are looking for things like desert 4 o'clock or orange carpet Zaschenheria or something like that. Like maiden grasses are really popular early in the season for some reason. I've never figured that one out why. But the funny thing is that most of those grasses and most of those plants, they don't overwinter very well for nurseries. And so nobody ever has any going into the spring. So they have to start them in like February, March, but they're not going to finish until later in the season, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's why you have like these big holes of what you're trying to find early, and you can't, because they're really not going to be available later into the season, and then you also have the issue of like, once it gets hot, people are like, oh, it's hot outside, I can't plant.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't plant where these plants are available, you're not going to get these plants. So, and planting in the heat isn't a terrible thing. I think that's just something that's kind of caught on. I don't know why. I mean, is it the ideal time? No. Are there better times? Yeah, probably. But the amount of loss that you get when you're planting in say like August or something, statistically isn't all that much more than, if you planted it at any other time of year. So all you have to do is just watch it more. And I think that's the biggest issue, is that people just don't know that they have to watch their plants. So instead of maybe checking on them once a day, you might have to check on them twice a day if you plant it in July or August.
Interesting. Yeah. So it's very similar to like a container plant, because I know I'm going out and watering my containers right now twice a day.
Yeah.
And not that much different with, once you get a plant in the ground, it's still considering, the roots are just about the size of a container, just depending on what it was grown in.
Oh yeah, especially like with new plantings, it's just the roots haven't spread out yet. Once things get established, they're usually fine. You don't really have to check on them a ton.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think you just dispelled an interesting myth, because I have seen a lot of that talk in some of the garden groups right now. Just that, hey, look, is it okay time to plant, or is it just too hot? And so it's good to bring that out, that it's okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, at the nursery, we do all of our production for the following year in June, July, and August. That's when we were planting at the nursery for next year.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like all the production that we've done, some of the stuff we'll have for like later in the season, especially this year, because I have never seen the consumption of plant material like we have this year. This has been insane. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that we plant this year is for like next, spring sales. Like I said, there's a couple of plants that you can't really just produce, or they don't overwinter well. Like the ones that I mentioned earlier. But yeah, it's just, we've always planted in the summer, and I've never understood why other people don't. So yeah, we don't have problems of like losing plant material. So
yeah. Okay, listeners. So you heard it here. You can plant this time of year as long as you just keep it good and watered. Keep an eye on it. And the plants tell you when they're thirsty. I mean, it's completely obvious when it's time to, get some water on those guys.
Sometimes you have to catch it early, because if you go for too long, then it's too late. You end up burning the plant. So you just have to really watch your plants. And, what I've always done is that I've planted something, I water it in really, really good that the moment that I plant it, and then I just stop. And then I just watch that plant, and then I wait to see how long it takes for it to wilt.
Yep.
Okay? Then I add a little bit of water and watch it perk back up after about like an hour or two. Yep. And then I just wait for it to wilt again. You don't have to keep your plants looking healthy and robust every single second. Like they'll take a little bit of abuse, and we'll be better off for it.
Yeah, because overwatering is almost sometimes just as sensitive to the plant as underwatering.
That's the funny thing is that's usually the cause of death from what I've seen in Utah. It's either people overwatering. They're trying to kill it with kindness.
Yeah.
That's about probably 60 to 70% of the time.
Yeah. Well, and it's dangerous here in that a lot of our clay soils they don't drain as well. And so you've really,
right.
You've really got to amend that soil when you're planting in many occasions.
A lot of it, though, too, is how you deliver your water. If you are using a drip system, which is something that I've always advocated, I like to do like point source type drip, where you're just watering for the plant. The best thing to do is to deliver the water that you need. Just do it very slowly, especially with clay soils. So, instead of doing like a 5-gallon, emitter for like 2 minutes or something like that, do like a half gallon or a 1 gallon emitter and have that go for like 30 to 45 minutes. Because then it'll slowly percolate through the soil a lot more, not overwhelm the plant, and then it'll kind of drain out a little bit better too. So, and then just kind of, just watch how much water that you're actually giving the plant at any given time and how fast it kind of drains out before it shows stress again. Then you'll have much better success with managing water, because with clay soils, a lot of times, if you dump a whole bunch of water on it all at once, in this heat, sometimes it just evaporates away and doesn't actually percolate through the soil and get to the plant roots. So if you add it over a slow amount of time, it's like slowly hydrating a sponge, if that makes sense.
I love that. That is a really, really good tip. Okay, well, when we come back right after this break, we are going to talk with Cameron about branded products. Is it worth it? Stay with us.
860 KKAT with Jana Francis and Gardening Utah, where it's always mulch time. She really does have the nicest yard on the block. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and I'm here in Salt Lake City, Utah, and we've got Cameron Allcott from Progressive Plants, and he is joining us from Idaho today, where it's much
Idaho.
Yeah, where it's much cooler than it is down here, so I'm jealous. So we were just talking about we want to talk about branded products. Is it worth it? And what we mean by that is when you see a logo on the potted plants, something like, let's say, Proven Winners, is it worth buying a branded product? So give us the scoop.
Well, branded product in the nursery world, that was pretty controversial for a long time. And it still kind of is, especially if you get to like the old school nurseries that are out there. When I think Proven Winners first started, there was a lot of resistance to it because, they were just like kind of taking plants and then patenting it. And that was like kind of like a new concept. Like why would somebody patent a plant and have exclusive rights to it? And that seems to be counterintuitive to the values of gardening, because all of a sudden it's like, oh, instead of like sharing our knowledge and everything, it's like, now we are holding on to like these trade secrets, and it's like it's going to be all for me, and it's going to give rise to like these big, huge corporations that already exist. And so that was like kind of like the mentality with it. And it just all of a sudden royalties came into play. It's like all of a sudden you had to not only pay for like the plant and then a royalty. Oh, and you have to sell it in this pot. So I have to buy this pot that's now more expensive than the regular black trade pots.
Yeah.
So a lot of nurseries were kind of like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like it's right. It's like, why would I want to pay more when I have this other plant that does basically the same thing? That's not patented, and I could sell it for cheaper and whatever, And so that was like really controversial for a long time, and it still kind of is, depending on who you talk to. But in my experience with branded product is you've got some really good minds that like of plant breeders who are doing some pretty incredible things with plants. And, regardless of how you feel about like the ethics of, patenting genes or whatever, they've come out with some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
And now that, our way of living has kind of changed a little bit too. been working really hard on developing plants that have very particular characteristics to perform in the landscape. So like you get a like Rose of Sharon, for instance. I mean, everybody loves Rose of Sharons, especially at this time of year where they're blooming and they're just like so pretty everywhere.
Yes.
And then if you live someplace, say like, Daybreak or some like these newer developments where your yards are teeny. So if you've only got like a 10 square foot front yard, which happens nowadays, you can't put a Rose of Sharon there that takes up 30 square feet.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah.
So like say Proven Winners, for instance, they have developed some Rose of Sharons that are really tall and skinny. There's a white pillar and a purple pillar Rose of Sharon. They get about 10 feet tall, but they only get 2 feet wide.
Wow.
So instead of something getting 15 feet tall and 6 feet wide or 8 feet wide or whatever whatever cultivar they get, you now have one that you can get the same flowers and stick it in a corner in a little teeny tiny yard, or you can get really creative with them and start making flowering hedges with them.
Ooh, that sounds beautiful.
Which is kind of neat.
Well,
Yeah.
I was going to say, speaking of, you just spurred my thought because I'm going to be looking for plants like that to provide that will kind of go tall and columnar to provide a kind of a showy sort of edge to a certain part of my yard. So we'll be talking about those later.
Yeah, and it's really kind of cool. Like First Editions, they've done some pretty cool things too with like a lot of like the 9-barks and dogwood. So they've taken like just regular plain old shrubs and improved their color immensely, improved their structure immensely. So now you've got like these plants, and yes, they have royalties, and yes, they're a little bit more expensive, but they are showier than a lot of like the normal cultivars that people will usually get to save $1 or $2. But they also have very specific growing habits. And what people don't really think about is all of a sudden, these branded products now require less maintenance than their non-branded or non-patented cultivars, if that kind of makes sense.
Absolutely.
So, like one of my favorite examples is there's a type of 9-bark that's out that's, like everybody knows, like Diablo 9-bark or Summer Wine 9-bark. They've been out for about like 20, 30 years. And, they're kind of like purple, but they get really, really rangy. Like they'll grow like out and around. And they just I think they just look like a weedy mess once they get bigger. I mean, some people like the look, but I've always thought that they were just kind of unruly. But they've been developing 9-barks that look very similar, or they have better color. Like there's one that's called Panther, that I think is really neat. It has a really dark color to it. There's also a Summer Wine Black that also has a very dark color to it. They are more resistant to a lot of like the pests, like powdery mildew, and they also have better structure to where you don't have to prune them as much. So yeah, you might spend a little bit extra in the royalty costs, but the performance of the plant is way better than the non-patented cultivars. So if you like, pruning things down or having like ugly stuff in your yard, that's totally fine. But like a lot of the branded stuff has really improved how I maintain my yard and how much I have to be in it. Because I think I've spent a grand total of 2.5 hours in my yard this summer.
You're kidding.
No, I do nothing. So I go out and I'll pull a couple of weeds and that's about it. But that's because I understand my maintenance schedules. And I also understand what plants are going to be a nightmare to deal with.
Yeah.
But I can get something else that will give me the same effect and not have to, do all the maintenance with it. I don't have to prune. I'm not out there deadheading. There's just a lot of things that I don't have to do because of how I've landscaped my yard. Does that make sense?
This is why, ladies and gentlemen that are listening to this show, this is why you hire professionals like Cameron, because then you only need to spend that much time in your yard working on it. You spend the rest of the time enjoying it. Yeah,
I just sit out in the breakfast and or sit on my patio for breakfast. I just enjoy my yard. I sit in the evening, enjoy the yard. I mean, it's a wonderful thing.
Oh my word. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't have the same experience because I didn't do it as properly as I should, but we all know that we've got another half of my yard to work on, and we'll do it right with that side. So when we come back after this, we're going to have more with Cameron Allcott from Progressive Plants. Stay with us.
She's more than just gardening puns and sage advice. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis on 860 KKAT. 860 KKAT with more of the fastest growing show on radio. It's Gardening Utah with Jana Francis.
Welcome back to Gardening Utah. I'm your host, Jana Francis, and we're talking plants today with Cameron Allcott from Progressive Plants. Thanks for joining us again, as always.
My pleasure.
So you guys have some classes coming up at Progressive Plants. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, one of the things that we wanted to do this year was a lot more with like education, and then COVID hit, and that kind of changed everything. So, if you've ever been out to our nursery, you've seen like our big, huge office, and then we've got actually like meeting rooms that we were going to actually have like presentations, classes, special guests, and things like that. That we have not been able to use because of how things are going this year. But now that we have like some sort of an idea of what we can do, with COVID restrictions, and CDC guidelines and things like that, we have a better understanding of how we can, operate as a business. So, one of the things that we wanted to do was get some education in, at least for the last half of the year. And so we are actually doing socially distant walking tours of the nursery with, specific subjects kind of in mind. So the first one that we're doing, and this starts next week, I believe on, is it the 7th and 8th of August? Is that right? Is that a Friday and a Saturday?
I think so.
I think so. I can't remember my dates for sure. Every day is a blur at this point.
They all end in Y is basically what I know.
They all end in Y. And somehow I am now 40 years older than when I started. But yeah, so we're having classes. We're actually having a special guest where our sales rep from Proven Winners, Spring Meadow Nursery, who is actually responsible for a lot of the development of a lot of the Proven Winner color choice shrubs, is going to come out and give presentations on the different plants, and then that they have available that actually will work really well in our climate, and that will kind of help with how to grow them, how to cultivate them, how to maintain them. So it's going to be like a really cool class. I think I've got a couple of spots left. It started selling out pretty quick when I posted it online.
Yeah.
But we're doing 4 of those seminars next week, and they've almost all sold out. But there's a few spots left as of this recording. And then some of the other classes that we're doing, I think about 3 weeks after the one with Proven Winners, we're going to be doing one with, what was it? Like selecting the right type of tree for your yard. And so we'll do like a walking tour of like all of the trees, and we'll kind of talk about the different trees that are good for different areas of the valley, et cetera. So anybody who shows up to that can get like really personalized advice for where they live. And then we're doing another one in September about, creating 4-season interest for the yard. That'll be a really fun one. That'll be another walking tour that we have at the nursery because we can stay socially distant and whatnot. And then the last one that we're doing, I think is going to be in October, is fall cleanup and what you should be doing to prepare for the following year so you don't have as much work that you have to do.
Yeah.
2021.
That'll be a good one.
What you don't do in maintenance now is you pay for it 6 months from now.
Yeah.
So that's how that works.
We're going to have a busy fall on Gardening Utah with tons and tons of content for our listeners to keep them up on all the maintenance tasks that you've got to do in the yard that time of year. Yeah. That is
it's easy. Yeah, easier and said than done though, because sometimes yard work gets pretty overwhelming sometimes. But if you do certain things at the right time, your life is just so much easier.
Yeah, fall is crucial for yard maintenance for the next year. So if a listener is interested in these classes, where do they go to have a look?
You can go to our website at progressiveplants.com. There is a link on the main page where it'll send you to like the different seminars and whatnot. If you want the direct link, you can go to progressiveplants.com/classes.html. You can tell who also codes the website. So, because I do that, that's why I know all of these things.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so you can register for there. The classes are $10, so not a huge amount, and you bring a +1. So it's like, basically $5 a person, essentially, if you bring a partner. And then we're also giving out discount codes for future orders online if you end up coming to one of the seminars. So there's a little bit of incentive. Not only do you get to learn about plants or tasks or whatever that you're trying to do, but you can also get a discount when you order stuff online with a special promo code that we're going only for the attendees of the classes.
Oh, that's fantastic. And
so basically, we're paying you back the $10 or more.
Yeah, exactly.
By you showing up.
Yeah. And so tell the listeners where it's located.
So Progressive Plants is on 10252 South Bacchus Highway in Copperton. If you don't know where Copperton is the southwest corner of the Salt Lake County. And it is kind of like where the big ugly mining area is on the Ochre Mountains. Like, we're at the base of that. We get to look at that every single day.
Yeah, got it.
We get to watch all the big, huge dump trucks just like dump stuff off. It's really cool.
Oh my word. And it's huge too.
Yeah, it's 100 acres. So it takes a long time. You can book a golf cart online, and we actually encourage you to do so, because we get so many people at this point where it's just like, we have to try to like funnel it somehow, because we're so big. Like, it's really like trying to do traditional retail sales is really challenging. But we found a lot of success with booking the golf carts online, and people can just kind of book it. They have their golf cart, drive around, get ideas, and learn about the process of growing plants just by visually seeing everything around. And it's really kind of cool, especially like right now, since all the hydrangeas are blooming. We have like acres of hydrangeas. It's insane.
Is it weird to say that I can't think of something that sounds more fun right now than hopping in a golf cart and driving around a nursery to look at plants?
It's kind of fun.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think people don't really quite understand like how long it takes to travel, because I think most people are like, oh yeah, I'm going to go to the garden center and go pick out a couple of plants,
Yeah.
And which is fine for like small, like garden centers. We've got plenty of those in Salt Lake, and they're wonderful garden centers. But there is something very different about going to a production facility and seeing nothing but like Russian sage and Bloomis spirea, just like all blooming. Like the pugster butterfly bush that we have at the nursery right now, like, I took a picture of it the other day because there were so many bees and so many butterflies, and not just like honeybees, but I'm like every native bee from like miles around were all over these pugsters. And I couldn't believe it. I was hanging out with Liz Hamilton. I think you had her on the show.
Yeah.
We were just like walking around looking at stuff in our nursery, because she was just around picking up some plants, and we were just absolutely astounded with like how many pollinators were on some of these plants. Like, it's incredible.
Oh my word!
You
have a beehive? Do you have any beehives up there?
I got a guy that he stores his bees at our nursery. We just kind of let him, because you have 100 acres. What do you do with it?
Right.
So he's a commercial bee guy, and he'll bring bees in, and then he'll ship them off to California, on like semis or whatever, and then come back. And it's just really kind of cool with how he does it. But we have a lot of bees, lots.
Fantastic.
So.
Yeah, I was noticing on my catmint the other day that I just could not believe. Now I do have a beehive, but
believe. I see what you did there.
Oh, the garden puns are out. I love it. Oh my gosh, you caught me. Okay, I'm laughing. That was hilarious. But yeah, so I was looking at the plant. I could not believe. I just did it again. Oh my gosh. Anyway, so many bees of all different, because I love looking at plants to see my bees in action, because they have a different kind of a look than some other bees. Mm-hmm. And then I noticed how many native bees there were, and just, it's unbelievable how much, pollinators can attract to your yard.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And Liz, she knows a lot about bugs.
Yes.
Too. She probably knows more about bugs than she knows more about plants. So yeah, it's kind of fun hanging out with her and just like, oh, there's this kind of bee and there's this kind of bee and there's that kind of bee. And I'm like, aren't bees just bees? But
yeah. Now, if you're a new listener to Gardening Utah, you've definitely got to look back in our episode notes or our episode list on Apple Podcasts, because Liz has been on the show and she is nothing short of an actual, insect genius. It's incredible.
Yeah, she's really, really smart.
She's so
really smart.
Yeah, it's insane. Okay, so now that I know that I want to come and hop in a golf cart and ride around the nursery, and it's in Copperton. So again, you can go to progressiveplants.com to check out to see if they have any openings of the upcoming classes that are the first Friday, Saturday in August, correct?
Yes, I think it's the 7th and 8th. And then we're doing another one. I want to say it's the 29th, but I don't have my calendar up. So I'm not sure, but yeah, check the website, because I think all the classes are up at this point, and we're taking reservations on all of them.
Okay, so I have one last question for you. When you do show up for the class, does it, so if you haven't decided what kind of plant material you want, is it possible to sort of shop and purchase there and then, or should you do your research in advance and get an account going online and stuff?
I would say definitely get an account going online, and then just keep if you see something there that you like while we're kind of like walking around and looking at different stuff. I mean, you could just order it straight off of the website, like while you're sitting there from your phone. So That's kind of like how we started operating, because when you're a production nursery, it gets really hard to be able to communicate to customers like what's available and what's not, because I could have planted something like 3 weeks ago and it might look really good, but it has no roots on it, So then they go home and they take them and it just falls apart and dies, so it gets kind of hard. That's why we can't really do like the whole grab and go like other nurseries can do. So it's a little bit of a disadvantage that we have, but at the same time, like our inventory online is mostly accurate. So you can just kind of, as you're walking around, if it's available on the website, you can buy it, and if you see something that you like and you're not sure, you can always ask and really look it up and check it and see if it's available. If it is, we'll let you take it. But yeah, that's the best way to do it. It's just like have your phone open and just hit add to cart as you're walking by. And then my guys will actually just go and they'll just pick everything up for you for your order and then load it into your car and then send you on your way. It's that it. You don't even have to lift a finger.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay. Well, I'm going to be joining you for at least one of them coming up very soon.
Okay.
I got to get
Sounds good to me.
And I have so much plant material I need to buy. As listeners know, I'm going to be landscaping the other part of my yard. And so it's going to be filled with all the things that Cameron recommends, and I can't wait.
Oh, I've got so much funky stuff that nobody really knows about at the nursery. So we're gonna find some neat things.
Oh, I cannot wait. I'm so excited. Well, Cameron, enjoy Idaho, and thanks for joining us today on Gardening Utah, as always. And thank you for being a great advocate of our show. Much appreciated.
You bet.
All right, everybody, go to progressiveplants.com and check it out. Sign up for the classes. And Cameron, we'll have you back soon. Thanks so much for joining us.
No, thank you.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Gardening Utah. I hope that you enjoyed the show and learned something new. Be sure to join us next week, because part of our show next week is going to be talking about garden snakes. We are getting so many questions about, oh my gosh, there's a snake in my garden. What should I do? We're going to get into that with scales and tails next week. So I'm really excited. We're going to be learning a little bit about that as part of the topic next week. Thank you so much to Cameron Allcott for being a guest on the show today. And thank you to progressiveplants.com and Harvest Gold Organics for sponsoring this show. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. I'm Jana Francis. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week on Gardening Utah. And remember, grow big or go home.
When you're ready to grow big or go home, make your neighbors green with envy. Get the Gardening in Utah podcast, Gardening Utah, available wherever you get your podcasts and at 860kkat.com/garden.